They're super hot, super cold, super disgusting when you get a bit of sand in your mouth by accident and bite into it. Deserts can be oppressive places, but what sorts of terrifying and often unexplained things can be found there? Today's stories will shed some light on that. Enjoy these allegedly true, scary stories that take place in deserts. Go to darkstories.org to share your story with us so I can narrate it, and check out eeriecast.com to listen to all our horror-themed shows. Now, let's begin. Angry Anasazi Spirits from Southern Utah, from GrayFall. This story takes place in the Red Rock Deserts of southern Utah, in the canyon of Cane Gulch, to be precise, for those brave enough to reenact this story. My family has always loved the great outdoors, and nigh every weekend we were out doing something that involved being in nature. Kayaking, mountain biking, hiking, backpacking, you name it. I was 7 years old when this trip took place. My dad had won a lottery to obtain a permit to camp in Cane Gulch in southern Utah, a land beloved by my family for its rugged terrain and serene beauty. This particular canyon is well known for having multiple cliffside dwellings of the ancient Anasazi people. So intact, even after hundreds of years, you can still see the cobs of corn they ate, even the feathers of the turkeys they raised and slaughtered, as well as ancient fragments of pottery they created when they still roamed those lands, all of which could still be found amongst the arcane houses, like they were there just a few days ago. The plan for the first night was to hike the 7 or 8 miles into the designated camping sites at the end of the canyon, and camp there for the night. The hike itself took you right underneath what must have been a dozen Anasazi dwellings, which you could all climb into with the ladders they made in the soft sandstone cliffs all those centuries ago. Each set of ruins was marked on our map, so we knew exactly where every ruin was on our way. It's very important to note that no one is allowed to take anything from these sites, which we all followed to the letter. Not only is it extremely illegal and unethical, but each time you summited their ladders and stood inside their catacomb-like mud brick house villages, a heavy presence weighed on you. I'm not sure if it was just the sense of knowing just how ancient those buildings were, or something more supernatural, but I assure you, it always felt as if someone, somewhere, would know if you took anything. The hike itself was long and grueling. It was a high desert at the tail end of summer, and we were lugging around dozens of pounds on our backs all day. Every time we passed by a ruin we could all easily reach, we took a short break and explored it. The day passed on like this, uneventful, fun, and tiring, until at last we came upon the backcountry campsite cluster deep in the wilderness. There were several sites to choose from, with each campsite being about 100 yards away from the next. Once I saw the very first campsite, I was immediately adamant that we set up camp there. I really insisted that we set up camp at this particular site, but we had the entire campground to choose from, as we were the only ones there, and my parents wanted a tree for shade to shelter us from the scorching late afternoon desert sun. I refused to keep searching though. This campsite, I said. It had to be this campsite. My parents and even myself at the time just thought I wanted that site because it was the first one we came across, and I was whiny and tired. That was definitely true. I was only 7 at the time, but something else drew me to that site. Alas, I was overruled, and on we hiked until we settled into a site with a grand old cottonwood tree. I'm talking this tree was easily over 200 years old, it was so massive, definitely a tree capable of providing all the shade we could ever need. Its canopy spanned at least 100 feet. We set up camp and settled in as the sun began to wane closer to the western horizon, and evening set in. As we all went about our downtime, waiting for dinner, I remember a feeling I got. That sense you get when you're being watched. Sometimes the eyes felt as if they were down the trail we came from. Sometimes they were in that large bush 20 feet to my left. Sometimes they felt as if they were just over my shoulder. That feeling got so strong in me, I remember asking my parents if they felt it too. Partially to my relief, and partially to my disappointment, they also mentioned that they felt eyes on them. My mom was sitting on a rock, writing in her notebook about the trip so far. She looked down at her shoe and saw a $50 sized piece of archaic pottery. Deep earthen brown and speckled with an ornate wave-like design pattern. Strange, she thought, and later recounted to me years after this. What's this piece of pottery doing here? There aren't any ruins nearby. She turned her gaze up beyond the canopy of the cottonwood tree, and there, plain as day, was a set of Anasazi ruins, completely unmarked on our map. Probably 100 yards away and 30 feet up the canyon walls, strong like the earth they're made from. Primordial, dried clay dwellings of a bygone era stood steadfast, watching over our sight. At this point in the day, I was too tired and no longer thrilled at the prospect of investigating another set of ruins to bother exploring this set. I've been in and out of them all day. These surely couldn't be any different, I thought. The sun continued its arc across the sky and soon kissed the western horizon. The eyes, I felt, never blinking, seeming to never look away for the rest of the afternoon. Dinner was served and eaten, and we were treated to a symphony of frog croaks, coyote howls, owl hoots, and bug buzzing that was so loud it was almost deafening. I remember my dad, bathed now in the soft ethereal glow of the moonlight, pretending to be an orchestra conductor directing the animals of the world in their song of the night. It took the edge off and is one of my favorite memories of the trip. We fell asleep just in our sleeping bags on the ground that night, right underneath the largest branch of the cottonwood tree. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, but the tree would provide us shelter from rain if something unexpected were to happen. And unexpected things did indeed happen. As we were sleeping, that very same branch, hundreds of years old and withstanding all storms and extreme weather southern Utah can offer, collapsed. My family and I all woke up to a terrible creaking noise right above us, like a tree in a hurricane as the wood and branches contorted and twisted. And yet there was no wind that night, but the branch ached and groaned just the same. We began getting up and moving just as the first splitting noises were heard, followed by a thunderous clap and crash as several tons of wood split from the tree and slammed into the ground where our heads had lain just seconds before. Terrifying for sure, but we had no time to react to our near-death experience. The sagebrush and drought-riddled bushes all around our site began rustling violently. Again, there was no breeze here, but dozens of bushes all around us began rattling like hundreds of angry rattlesnakes. For the second time tonight, all of us were deafened. Being the dead of night, and definitely out of our logical minds, my parents packed me up, turned on our headlights, and just ran down the trail. Following us down the trail, the once motionless bushes rattled to life as we passed them, heading to another campsite. After what felt like an eternity of being scared absolutely crapless, but in reality was probably 7 to 10 seconds, we arrived at another campsite. One with no trees or anything, just a large, empty circle. As we entered the campsite, the rustling ceased immediately, and the sounds of the animal orchestra took over, calming, peaceful. After several minutes or so, my dad mustered up the courage to return to our old campsite to retrieve our sleeping bags, and brought them back to our new haven for the night. We eventually calmed down and fell back to sleep. In the morning, I instantly recognized where we were staying. It was the very first campsite on the trail, the one I had been so drawn to. Needless to say, we had a quick breakfast that morning, and we immediately gathered our stuff at the cursed site, preparing to hike back out right away. As we packed up what we left in our terror, I looked up to where the ruins that weren't marked on the map were. But instead, now all I saw was a painted limestone canyon wall. One that has stood for millions of years and has probably never been touched by humans. Gone were the ruins we saw yesterday. I pulled my dad aside, asking him if he saw the same thing. To my horror, he looked briefly in between packing up the cooking gear and said to me, "Yep, there's nothing there. They're not there anymore. After last night, that doesn't even surprise me anymore. I get the feeling we need to leave. So hurry up, help us pack." "I get the feeling we need to leave," he said. Yes, that was the feeling I felt this morning. That's another thing that was different. Gone were the watchful eyes, and here now was the feeling of being a trespasser. I obediently began helping my parents pack up, and we were back on the trail within the hour. I can happily say that the rest of the trip went fine, and the malicious feeling that consumed the pit of our stomachs dissipated about a mile down the trail. I've always believed in ghosts and spirits, and I could tell that they were pleased to see us be on our way and wouldn't mess with us anymore. Horror is my favorite genre, and I've experienced more possibly supernatural events and have encountered some cryptid-like animals in my travels in the wild since. But this trip was what it took for me to believe that there are forces at play we don't and probably will never understand. If any listeners ever get lucky enough to experience the beauty of Cane Gulch in southern Utah, please be respectful. Pack out what you pack in, respect the wildlife, obey trail rules, and, perhaps most importantly, make sure you knock and wait for approval before entering someone's house. Even if the person isn't there anymore, they will still know who has trespassed. The Lantern Man, from JoshMegosh. I play music. I'm not here to promote. My band no longer performs. But I do wish to tell a story from a time we were on the road, however. We were driving west. About 5 of us headed to California for our next tour date. It was our first time as a band driving through Nevada, and it happened to be at night. This particular road, I believe, is called Devil's Alley, or something like that. I don't know. I am a practical guy and I don't believe in anything paranormal, and I'm not superstitious whatsoever. This was a long stretch of road that had no lights, stores, or homes. It was a barren place with just desert and road. Since time was of the essence, whenever we had to relieve ourselves, we'd usually use empty water bottles. Gross, I know, but believe me when I tell you this. Every big artist has had to do this at some point. That's part of tour life. However, this particular night, we had some time with the day off following, so we decided to pull over and use the bathroom right there on the side of the desert. Me and my bassist, Derv, stood relieving ourselves while looking up into the stars. They were beautiful. We made a comment on how they looked and added that it was possibly due to the low light pollution in this part of town. We then looked into the darkness of the desert. One could only guess what stood behind the veil of black. The only light around was whatever light our band van produced. It was dark. Though the night sky was clear, I don't even really remember seeing the moon now that I think of it. Stars, yes, but no moon. But while looking into the dark of the desert, we saw a lantern. It was a good distance out, and I asked Derv if he saw it. He did. "What the heck is that?" he asked. I acknowledged that nothing is out there. He asked me what I thought it looked like, and I told him a lantern, which he replied, "That's what I see." "Let's go check it out," I suggested. I know this sounds crazy, but there were a total of 5 of us. Some of the others were standing outside at the moment, but it wasn't like it was just me and him. Plus, I don't believe in ghosts and crap like that. I'm all about making sense of things. I do acknowledge that this was odd, but it had to have an explanation. I really wanted to check it out, as did Derv. Before we went into the darkness, our bandmates criticized us for the time we've wasted standing outside and urged that we had a schedule to follow. Reluctantly, we agreed and I began driving again. Derv sat beside me and we set up, talking about what it could have been. We joked about aliens since we were in Nevada. We also thanked our bandmates for stopping us from going into the desert. That would have been reckless. That light was probably much further than we thought, and who knows what was out there with coyotes and rattlesnakes. We made it to our destination and had a great tour. Fast forward to now. That was many years ago. Some of those in that van I don't even speak to anymore. Time does weird things, I guess. Lately, I've been into watching YouTube videos of scary stories and the world's oddest or most dangerous things. For example, I watched one recently that was the top 5 most dangerous roads in the world. No need for a link to it. Just type that in and you'll likely come across it. While watching this video, they began talking about that long, dark stretch of Nevada highway. Devil's Alley. I'm a vocal person, so excited, I started typing a comment telling about how I drove on it. The video was pretty much only talking about the road and how barren it is. Meanwhile, I'm typing my story, and as soon as I start to tell about the lantern we'd seen, the video suddenly says, "Some people claim to have seen a spirit known as the Lantern Man. This ghost tried to lure people with his lantern." And holy crap, I freaked out and called Derv. Mind you, I hadn't spoken with him in a long time. He answered. I asked him about the night, and just like me, he remembered it vividly. I can't say I believe in ghosts, because I just can't. What I can say, though, is that something does dwell in the darkness deep in the barren desert off the roads, holding something that looks to be a lantern. My strange and horrifying experience in the desert night. From Darkangels. I was riding in the car on the way from a day in the city. It was late at night, very dark, and there were lots of stars in the sky. I was just a little girl at the time, about 7 years old, but that night I can remember well. As my parents and I continued on through the night, we saw a really bright green glow coming from the far side of the desert. We thought nothing much of it and kept on driving, but suddenly that glowing green light got brighter and closer. I swear I was so scared at that point, I nearly soiled myself. The light then vanished for a second. Then it was almost like it flew right in front of the car, then disappeared into the darkness of the desert. My parents and I were completely shaken. We sat there in shock, and we finally decided to continue on our way home, which was still another hour and a half drive away. We talked about what the light could have been. Instantly, I spoke up and said it was aliens. My parents just laughed. Another half hour into our drive home, we saw another light, but this light was almost like a laser light, red and bright, kind of like someone was playing with a laser pointer, only brighter and thicker. That was when we realized we were not alone. We were being followed, and that laser light was not from a pointer, but a gun. My father stepped on the gas, and we were out of there. We didn't look back, only forward. We made it home especially fast, doing above the speed limit the rest of the way to the house. All I can say is though we still speak of it years later, I'm now 22, and it still scares us to this day. So, whatever it was in the desert that night, I hope we never meet again. Horror at a government property. From madithebadi. It was June of 2018. My family, a family friend, and I decided it would be fun to drive out to a particular place that is popular among people searching for aliens. Chances are you've heard of it, as it is extremely popular and is owned by the government. The location is in the middle of nowhere, and what was supposed to be a 1 or 2 hour long drive turned into almost 4 hours. By the time we got to the themed gift shop, it was already 9 p.m. We stopped by in the gift shop, which was closing, and looked around for a bit. We then decided to drive further up the road and see if we could find anything interesting. As we drove down the dark road, we must have hit like 5 rabbits. They just kept darting across the road suddenly, so the trip was already off to a bad start. After about 20 minutes, we turned down a dirt road. Finally, we reached the gate. It was covered top to bottom and no trespassing signs, with watchtowers on either side. It seemed pretty legit, so we turned around and drove down the road for a few minutes so we could stop and look at the stars. We could still see the gate in the distance. Basically, the way it was set up was a road with expansive desert on either side, with pitch black darkness in front of us and the gate behind us. Now, this is where it gets weird. We parked our car on the right side of the road, and then went to the other side to sit and look at the stars. We kept hearing strange noises, like bushes rustling and footsteps. It felt as if we were being watched on all sides. We thought it must be another bunny, right? Wrong. We realized that after turning down the dirt road, there were absolutely no animals. I could only assume it must have been guards of the area watching us. We continued looking at the stars, and we kept seeing these bright lights that looked like stars, but they were moving very irregularly. They'd move a little to the right, change direction, speed up, stop, and even disappear. They were moving abnormally fast for planes, which, by the way, weren't even allowed to fly within this area. And then we all looked down at the same time, noticing a bright orange light sitting on top of a distant mountain. We all began to watch this light. Then we all looked back up to the sky, where we saw even more moving lights. When we looked back down again, the orange light was gone, so we carried on with our stargazing for a few more minutes. All of a sudden, the light came back, and this time, it headed right for us. And it brought a friend. These 2 huge lights were now hurtling towards us extremely fast, and we had no idea what to do or think. Just as we decided we should probably run for our lives, the lights just disappeared. We watched the stars for a while longer, then decided it was time to go. But we couldn't leave. Our car had a flat tire somehow, the one facing the side with the desert. So we changed the tire as fast as we could and booked it back home. I have no idea what happened to the tire, as it wasn't flat on our way there. All I know is I'm never going back there again. Possible Vampire Jinn, from Anonymous. This story occurred in Pakistan, more specifically in the middle of the desert, somewhere south in Pakistan. Ever since I was little, I absolutely loved chickens and chicks, so my dad decided to buy me 6 chicks. Every day we'd let them roam in our yard at 5 a.m. Then we'd put them back up in the cage at 7 a.m. One day when my mom went to put them back in the cage, she found them all dead. There was no blood around them, so the death was clean. There were also no bite marks. When my mother further inspected the bodies, she did actually find 2 puncture holes in all the chicks, and it looked as if the blood was sucked from them. She thought it was a cat, but cats eat their prey and take it with them. There was nothing else she could think of, so she told me a cat had killed the chicks. I was devastated, but after they bought me a parrot, which is still alive, I buried the chicks and forgot about them. But it wasn't over. The scariest part was yet to come. I'm not sure if the event I'm about to tell you is tied to the death of these chicks, but I think it is. One night at 2 a.m., something began running on the roof, and it was insanely fast. It sounded heavy too, because the whole house was shaking as it ran. I woke up my dad. He then locked the door to the room, then told my mother and brother, who had awakened because of the running, to stay quiet. You may be wondering now, why didn't my dad get a gun? That's because we didn't own a gun. The running continued until 3 a.m. Then it stopped. Whatever was up there began making screeching sounds and deep growling sounds too. These strange things continued until sunrise. When the sun rose, my dad went to check the roof. Up there, he found only a cat with the same 2-puncture mark wound on its neck. In my opinion, I think it was a Jinn, our version of ghosts, but I'm not sure. If you have any idea of what it might be, let me know.